Well, hello. Well, hello. Hello, Mike Manley.
Hello, Jamar.
I need a new gimmick. I need a monocle or something. I love it. Mike Manley, what are you reading tonight, sir?
I'm looking at a sketchbook by Claire Wendling.
Oh, Claire's amazing.
Yeah.
Is that a new pickup?
I'm trying to remember when I got this. It's actually autographed by her, so I don't know if I got this at Stuart Ing when we were there.
We've been talking about Stuart a lot lately.
Yeah. Well, he's a great sort of like Illustration House, where it's like one of those places where there's tons, or Illustration House used to be, where whenever you would go to New York, if you could stop by there, they'd always have fantastic artwork by all these great guys. I remember actually one of my first trip there, I actually met Bill Ray.
Oh, wow.
We talked about that a little bit on the podcast.
Yeah, we talked
but you'd go up there and there would be, Rockwells and Piles and Cornwells and Bob Peaks. It was just like your brain would explode. There was so much stuff.
Yeah. And
so Stuart's sort of like that because he has all the art books.
Yeah. And it reminds me more kind of like from a male standpoint of like the Bud Plant catalog, right?
Back in the day, yeah.
Did Bud Plant go out of business? I know there was a point where he pulled out of San Diego.
I don't think he's out of business, but he doesn't do like nobody this year. Nobody's doing San Diego,
no.
and a lot of the long time customers have not. A lot of the old businesses have stopped. I think have pulled out, partially because the show really became about everything else besides comic books. It's like comic books as movies,
right?
Comic books as TV shows,
right?
But not. I went last year. Mimi and I went last year, and that was the first time I had done it since 2005.
Mm-hmm.
It was bigger, but there were much less comic books. And like the area where guys used to sell old comics and things like that, it's like the artist alley's way over here, and then it was like, some other artists are way over here, and then like everything else is just like,
so spread out.
Yeah, it's really it's about media, and entertainment really, and comics is like a little teeny. It's the fountain from which most of this stuff comes from, but it's really not that celebrated like it used to be. So. I guess you disappeared. Jamar has disappeared. We're having our technical troubles this evening. But yes, so I would say Stuart's good. Claire Wendling's great. You can find her Instagram profile. She has a lot of good stuff on there. And I'm always buying art books. That's how I learned. Since I didn't go to college. You back?
Yeah, this is like Gremlin night.
Yeah. So as I was saying, I didn't go to art college. I went to a semester right after high school and I dropped out.
Yeah.
So how I learned actually was really by buying books and studying, comics and any kind of book that I could get on art. So I spent most of them, like some guys buy fancy sports cars and other stuff.
Yeah.
I mostly spent a lot of my income on books.
And you bought good stuff too, right? I think something that maybe somebody who would follow a path like yours in modern times, and that's not an age knock, but would just go, oh, I really love the art of this one guy. I'm going to just look at this dude and that's that. Right, without having like a strong breadth of, diverse styles, right?
Right. Yeah, I think a little while ago on my Facebook, somebody was asking me to post pictures of my bookshelves. So I just posted. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, I have 6 bookshelves just in this studio.
Mm-hmm.
1 in the bedroom, 1 in the next room, 1 in the other. It used to be the old computer room, and 1, 2, 3, 4 downstairs. So I have my house is mostly bookshelves.
That's a lot of shelves, my man.
You know, you know.
Oops.
That's just books, not even comics. There's an attic is full of crap.
Let's not even talk about comics. But let's talk about our sponsors, and then we'll bring our boy in because I think he's like just chomping at the bit to get on camera.
He's chomping at the chompies.
Yeah, we're running out of snacks in the green room. So Mike Manley, Pencil to Pencil is brought to you by Clip Studio Paint.
Yes.
Our good buddies at Graphicsly make one of the leading software suites for cartoonists and illustrators. If you don't have it, you need to cop it. And over here, oh, that was a great issue. I think that was my first issue, Mike.
Is it?
And over here, Mike Manley is holding up an issue of Draw Magazine with Kyle Baker as the cover feature. And I think I interviewed Scott Kurtz in that one.
Let's see. I will go through and see.
Yeah, I think I did. But hey, how could I get a copy of that, you may ask? Well, if you go to our other sponsor, Tomorrow's, and John Morrow over Tomorrow's Publishing makes the history of comics engaging and also accessible. So get over there and pick up lots of stuff.
It must have been the one after this because you're not in here.
Oh, I didn't interview anybody in that one?
No.
I swore. Okay, maybe it was the next one.
Well, wait a minute. Maybe it was. Did you interview Mike for this, Hawthorne?
Oh yeah, that's the Hawthorne issue. Yeah,
yeah. You interviewed Mike.
Yeah, I think Kurtz was my first, but that was a good one. That was a one where Mike Hawthorne had an eye patch on in his bio picture, and people thought he only had one eye.
Yeah, his poor kid, his eye was plucked out as a child.
It's so good.
Poor Voodoo. That's why he's so good. He gave an eye up.
Oh man. All right, guys. I would like to bring in our guest for the evening. He is an old pal of mine. We go back to school. I took a couple of
schools, high school, grade school,
college, well, art school,
street school,
school hard knocks. So part of my origin story, we don't have to get into today, is that I went to art school a couple of times, and like I kept washing out and starting again and washing out and starting again. And on one of my last rounds, I hooked in with this young man and a bunch of his friends, and I might have been the old guy in the back of the class watching these young guys just do amazing work and
sleeping like I'll let these kids do all the hard work.
I slept so much in art school, it's ridiculous. But
you could have been a model, just
but now my good friend Mike Capprotti is a leading voice in illustration, digital illustration, and he's done a lot of work for the comics industry, the video game industry, and things in between. And I thought we'd have a really great discussion about Philly and the East Coast, and also about digital
Another
tools.
Philly guy. So we have to ask him about John.
We'll have to ask Mike, because I think he's not a Philly guy. I think he's from Jersey, but we'll get there. So let's bring him in. Hey, Mike, how are you, brother?
Hey, guys, how you doing?
I'm good. Sorry, we like to ramble around here, so I hope you weren't.
I've been watching and listening, so
I hope you didn't have shaky leg while you're waiting to get on.
No, it's actually just on, Facebook posting like, "Oh, I'm going to be on Pencil to Pencil. Everybody, check it out." Trying to spread the word.
So you're a Philly guy, right?
I'm a Philly guy. Yes.
Okay. So, do you know about John? Because we were talking about this last week. John are you a John guy? Is that part of your vernacular?
I grew up with John, and it's weird because John disappeared. I was in my early teens, and John was everywhere. That was just the only word you would use. It's like we started running out of words. Yeah. And then, then I moved to Jersey when I was like 13, 14, and around that time, the word started to fade away. And it wasn't just because I moved to Jersey, but then cut to a couple years ago, I was, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago, a couple of friends of mine started using the word again. I'm like, oh, I haven't heard that word since I was a kid. And not long after that, it was everywhere again. I'm like, is John a thing again? What's happening?
Yeah. I think it was they had a hipster resurgence, I think is what happened.
Is that what it is? All the man
That's probably what it was.
John.
Right.
Well, Jamar, you posted a thing today about like a John farm or something, or
yeah. So right out of Philly, there's a new farmers market that opened up that does like farm to table, whole organic food, and it's the name of the company is called Farmer John. So I gave them a plug on my Instagram. So okay, before we get started,
another one.
yeah, maybe they'll give me a tote bag. Before we get started with the talking, just for anybody who's new to Pencil to Pencil, hello. If you're watching on YouTube, well, hello. If you're watching on our Facebook channel, hello. I cannot see you, so I would encourage lots of chatter in the chat room. If you have a question for myself or Mike or guest Mike, please put it into the comments. Now, here's the thing. I can't get to everything. We're going to have a nice adult conversation, and if what you're asking flows into that, great, I'll get it on. If I run out of time, sorry. But one thing I'll ask of the room, because I've been saying this a little bit lately, if you have a question, type a question. If you have 3 questions, type a question and hit return and type another question. Because people have been like dumping questions into one chat box, and it's killing me. So with all that said, let's get to talking.
Hopefully we have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell me like how you guys met? It was at UArts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'd like to hear what Mike has to say, because I was on the other end of the thing.
Well, it's funny because I'm sure our 2 stories, they probably wouldn't complete up. When I knew Jamar back at UArts, he was a friend of a friend, and we were, he was one of those guys who, I'd see him around. That guy's a cool dude right there, but I didn't know, a student work at this school or what, and honestly, even to this day, I'm not even sure. Were you actually attending school at the time, Jamar?
Yeah, what was interesting? Sorry, my dog's going crazy. So what had happened at that time is I went to UArts as a young man, as a student, and then I left in 2000. It was around 2000, right? Around 2000, I went back to UArts as an administrator. So I worked in housing, and I thought this would be the perfect time to. This would be the perfect time to finish my animation degree. So I probably saw you guys around, and then I had animation class with Jero and a couple of other people, like Joe and
Rob. Remember
Rob? Rob. Yeah. So, but I was kind of like, I had 6 hours a week that I could sneak into a studio and work. And versus this full-time job, and my boss was always like,
"You're like Ryan Reynolds." What was that movie where he was like in college forever?
Yeah, I was about to say Ned Flanders. You know what? What's his name? Van Wilder.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're the Van Wilder. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I remember running into Mike and his crew a lot, and they were just cool dudes. And one thing about you kind of can sniff out the people in a group, especially in art school, who have something. Right, there's a lot of pretending going on at art school, and then there's a couple of people that are like, right, they're about something.
Oh, there's a lot of, the bigger the school, the more pretending.
Yeah, a lot of pretending. So that's really real.
There's those guys get weeded out. They get weeded out after like year 1, year 2, and actually it's funny because a lot of people came into that school kind of cocky, and they're like, yeah, I got. And I'm again the first year because everybody just assumes that it's art school, it's easy, you sit there and you draw all day, what's so hard about that? It's like I've never worked so hard as I have in art school, and that set me up for the the professional life afterwards. So it was definitely a wake-up call, but that's that first year weeded most of the people out. So after that, you were either in it or you weren't.
Yeah. Manly, did you? Our stories are a little interesting. Not that they really connect with each other, but just kind of about the story about going back to school later in life and connecting with people who might be on a different kind of like age bracket than you, and kind of bouncing new ideas off of people. How was your relation? How was your experience when you went back to PAFA as a non-traditional student?
It was great. I think I can honestly say I was a better student at 45 than I would have been at 19, because having gone out in the world and worked for a long time, and I knew when I went back to school, I knew what I wanted to go back to school
Right.
for.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew what I wanted and what I needed, which is different than sometimes when you're 19, you don't know necessarily. A lot of people I found didn't know what they wanted. So it was 4 years of kind of like, kind of kick around. And then the last semester of fourth year is the, oh shit. I'm going to graduate. Oh, I need to learn how to.
Real, right?
Yeah. And when I was at UArts, there was that, because I was teaching juniors and seniors, and there was a lot of oh shit mixed with people who were thinking like, I'm going to have my own show on Cartoon Network, and it's like,
right, right.
So there's a lot of it's like high school fantasy camp, right? Because colleges treat everybody as a high school kid, really. They don't really treat them as adults, right? And then you graduate, and then you go out of that little incubator into the real world, and people are like, they're not nice to you like the third floor was, because they really want to take your money, right? So they try to find all kinds of ways to push you through. So yeah, so you find, like you guys were saying, you find out that there's the mainstream and like the lamestream. There's the people that are just doing it for 4 years.
Yeah.
But it was also different when I went, because at 45 there were a lot of people that were older than me and a lot of people that were younger than me, and I was somewhere sort of in the middle. And you didn't have that after a couple of years, because they got rid of the certificate program. And there was a lot of people that came who were older, who'd gone and had a career as a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, and then went back to art school later on because they had their career, and now they wanted to have fun. They wanted to do what they originally wanted to do, was be an artist. That disappeared.
Yeah.
And now it's basically 17, 18-year-olds coming straight in from high school, and they don't necessarily know what they want for a couple of years, and they try to make the first couple of years easy. I don't know if you guys experience that, but they try to make the first couple of years easy because they don't want to scare them away by going, art school is hard and you actually have to learn something. Like you have to learn how to, perspective, or you have to learn how to do anatomy. So we're going to give you an iPad, and we're going to take away the foundation, because UArts got rid of their foundation, right?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So a lot of these schools, while I was in school as a student, still working as a professional, but I was also teaching. So I got to see like the complete ball of how all this stuff works out. Mm-hmm. So you had kids who really shouldn't have been in there, right? And then you had people who were really serious, which was like a very small percentage.
Yeah, it was very small.
Well,
yeah, it was a shame. I remember. Oh, go ahead, Jamar. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Mike. Go.
No, I was just saying. I remember. Again, I would see the people who you could tell kind of early on they were there to hang out. They were there to just be with their friends. They liked to draw, so they thought that's what they were going to do. They would go to the school and get a diploma or whatever, to some degree. But obviously those people got weeded out. But it was kind of surprising because there was actually a fair amount of people who were good enough or like did just enough work to stay in that lifestyle. Like they actually, as I know, it was a lot of people actually from outside of the city. They would enjoy living in the city, living and being around other people that were limited, were just paying tens of thousands of dollars a year to have this lifestyle, when I don't really think that they had a direction, or they had any kind of real idea what they wanted to do once school was over, which is it's kind of sad. I feel like when I went there, that was, at the time I didn't realize it, but once I left UArts, I did finally understand that that was something that was, and I'm not knocking on UArts, but and this is probably similar at other schools, but that was something that was missing, I think, because UArts themselves, they pushed like children's books and editorial, and those are like kind of like the two main fields that they're like, you can go in these two fields, or maybe book covers, maybe paperbacks. But they weren't really tuned into things like concept art for games or movies, doing storyboards. It's like, you don't have to be an animator to do storyboards. There was key art for TV shows, movie or video games. There were so many different venues that you can do your work, but at the time they just weren't there. Like and they were really talented artists that were running the departments, but they knew this stuff was out there, but that's not what they were trying.
It's generational. It's generational.
It really was.
It's the same way at the academy, because they started an illustration program starting in around 2008, 2009, 2010. They started thinking about it, planning for it. And first they were going to call it fine art. They were going to call it fine art illustration, because if they said illustration, all the old heads were like, illustration, right, that's crap, right? And I remember having a discussion with them saying that part of the problem they were going to have was it was a generational cultural problem, because they would insult me or knock my work by calling it illustrative. To that generation,
exactly,
that was not a cool thing, right? It was like almost like being a whore. Why don't you just be a whore?
I mean, that's really how it was treated. I've going, for example, I did some of the painting classes related to learn how to paint. Like, oil was what I wanted to do. Like, Rockwell's my guy. That was Phil Hale and Rockwell. I know they're two different kind of ends of the spectrum, but those were guys who got me pumped. And Frazetta, oil painter was what I wanted to do. So I was really excited to do the painting program at UArts, and I got up there, and it was like your classic, they put a couple things of, a couple brush marks and a couple colors on a canvas, and it was a painting. I'm like, that's not what I want to learn. Like, teach how to paint the human form and all the subtleties and the lighting, and how to get that, like, now working in 3D, it's a term, but that like subsurface scattering, where you have a little bit of that red from the blood and the muscle underneath the skin
in the ear, like you can see my ear. That's what they're talking about.
Exactly, right, yeah.
My ear, yeah. I heard. I learned that.
Ear or your nose.
Right, now, when you would take
they weren't doing that in the painting.
Yeah, because when you talk about portrait painting, you realize that the nose and the cheeks and the ear are not the same temperature of red.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Which you get, like, in the old school guys would approach Gilbert Stuart, and a lot of the early portrait painters came up with those different formulas to do that kind of stuff. But that was not what you would necessarily get. I mean, you got a little bit more of that at the academy, and probably even more of that at Studio and Caminati, because that's what they did, right?
And when I was actually at UArts, that was something I was looking into. It's like, Nelson Shanks is doing exactly what I want to learn, but I didn't realize at the time that I wasn't going to be getting that at my school. And it's, again, not to knock UArts, it's just they were set up for one thing, while as in Caminati,
I'll knock them. I'll knock them.
I'll do all the dirty work.
I just try to be very honest about it. I knock all these art schools, 99% of them, for that, because we're going back to what you guys are talking about. You go in as a 19 or 20-year-old, you have this idea of what you want to learn. The problem is you don't know what you need to know until you're in your third or fourth year, and then you realize shit, I'm not learning what I want. Now I've already spent
It's
$80,000.
that aha moment, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so I always try to. I sort of feel like one of my main missions as a teacher is to tell students that, because then you are
Right.
prepared, and then you also have to do homework yourself as a student to inform yourself. And like if you go to medical school, I would say if you go to medical school, people spend a lot of time and money getting their kid ready to go to medical school. Which medical school are you going to go to? Which ones are good? What do they specialize in? Can I get a recommendation from somebody that's already in that school? All that stuff, right? Because I have friends whose kids are doctors, and that's what they did. Nobody does that for art school. Almost nobody does that. And that's why you end up so often.
Yeah, it's
what you're
a
saying.
shame. Yeah.
So were
the
you
nice thing
thinking
about the
that?
foundation program, at least. What's that, Mike?
Go ahead.
So I was just saying, were you thinking about that like from the beginning? Were you trying to chart a path for yourself?
Well, and Jamar knows, and Mike, I don't know if you know him, but I'm going to shout out to Jero Wimberly. It's my boy. We met each other our foundation year, and then we grew to be very, very close friends after that. And we were like two people. There were two peas in a pod. I mean, when we went into art school, we went in with like, I want to learn how to draw. I want to learn how to do art, and I also want to, when I'm done, I want to learn how to apply this to comics. Like that was our thing. Like when we get out of school, we're going to be comic book artists, blah blah blah. So we at least had that path set for ourselves. But that was actually something that worked against us because the instructors, there were one or two there who were either in comics or trying to get into comics, or they at least appreciated it. But there was everybody else who was just like, oh, don't do comics, do children's books, again, like do editorial stuff, and so we were lucky that we had a path. We knew what kind of field we wanted to be in. But I would say like halfway through our time at UArts, I don't know if you guys remember the website or if you were even familiar, conceptart.org.
Yeah.
It was
Before it
a
exploded.
website, right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, at the time it was, it started off kind of slow and you saw like some really, really cool posting stuff. And now it exploded in a good way into something where what a community, these guys were showing me things I didn't even know were possible, both as far as how they were doing the work, but also like where they were doing the work. At the time I didn't know about concept art as a field and like how many different places in that field you could put yourself. So again, we were lucky at that time that this it's like on because it opened the door for us as far as showing us what we could be doing with our abilities, as well as kind of like giving us a place to kind of socialize and get to know artists who are actually doing that. So by the time we were done, I didn't have a portfolio that was really geared toward what I wanted to do. All that happened literally like the day after I left to UArts, my first job. Once I got my first job, that was when everything started to kind of come back into focus, and I started to go down the path that I was hoping to go. So, yeah, it took a little while to get there, though.
So you sort of had one path that was derailed or sidetracked while you were in school, and then you kind of went back to your path, is what you were saying?
Right. Yeah. I mean, just because being a comic book, like at the time, I wanted to do interiors, which is knowing me now, that would never ever work. I'm not that fast. I'm not that good at panel breakdowns. It's just not my thing. And I learned that over time. But I went to school thinking I was going to do interiors, and again, a lot of the instructors there kind of discouraged that. So I kind of veered off that path, and a lot of the assignments that I was doing were more editorial based, or again, children's book based. But even though they were in those fields, I was still trying to put that like comic book twist to it. I was still trying to have the characters look a little bit more comic booky, or the lighting or something. inspired by film and comics that I couldn't help but that stuff couldn't help but creep into like the, the children's books and stuff. But yeah, once school was done,
the ugly duckling.
Right, right, exactly. But the nice thing about UArts that I will say really was it exposed me to a lot of things I probably wouldn't have been exposed to if I weren't in art school at the time. I mean, obviously the people that I met there, I mean, that changed my life. These people that I'm so happy to have met, and I mean that. That's one of I think the biggest things I got out of art school. But on top of that, we did get exposed to things like we got to go up to the Society of Illustrators a couple times, and I had artists and instructors that were not anywhere near the field I wanted to be, but that was the nice thing about it, was they would these things that I hadn't thought of before were instructing what I was going to be doing moving forward. I was able to take what they were teaching and apply it to what I was doing moving forward, and hopefully making artwork that was a little bit more unique because of it. I don't know if that paid off or not, but that was the idea.
Well, that's the great thing about art school, is being exposed to ideas and concepts that you wouldn't, because typically when we're young, we like the things that we like and to only consume the things that we like, right?
Right.
And then a teacher comes in and goes, well, I know you like to eat just this thing, but how about this? And you're like, well, maybe. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
You hit the nail right on the head. When I wasn't planning on going to art school at all. When I was in my senior year of high school, I was in a photography class, and that photography class, that teacher had that was junior year. So in senior year, he started this advanced like AP art class, and we didn't have anything like that in high school. Everything else was literally just 45 minutes to kill. That was it. It was practically study hall. But if you're going to be in my class, you're going to be doing what I tell you. He was like a drill sergeant. But what was awesome was like, great, finally somebody who's taking art seriously. And he was teaching us how to, do portraits like Chuck Close, on this large scale, different things. And I was like, yeah, this is cool, but I'm going to do comics, so I don't really need all of this. And he was like, you're going to art school. It's like, no, I'm not. You're going to art school. I was like, no, I'm not. So one day he walked in and he handed me a paper. He goes, signed you up for Saturday classes at UArts. You're going. I was like, what? I was like, so it was. And once I took those Saturday classes, of course I knew it was like, I was an idiot. I was trying in this tiny little world, and there's so much more out there. So, and of course this was the earlier days of internet. There wasn't nearly as much out there as there is now. So, art school really was a lot more valid and important at that time.
Yeah, I feel like the conversation's getting muddier. This is even like a pre-COVID thing. It's just kind of like, well, my kid likes art. I guess that's what you do next, right? You go to art school, or you go to art school to hide from liberal arts college. Right. Everybody's there for a different reason. But it was interesting, Mike, when you started talking about the internet kind of communities, right? Because that seems to be a big thing that we keep talking about on the podcast lately. Like the drawing board was such a big thing for a lot of comic book artists who are now in their prime. And even with like kind of like illustration and digital illustration, and just this kind of new world that was just starting to blossom, and people had magic tricks that they knew, and you had no way of getting access to any of that. And that was so beyond art school at that point.
Oh yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Like when you were at UArts, did they even have a computer lab, or was there any type of like?
It was real new.
We
actually, I think our lab, the illustration or the computers that were on the illustration floor, I don't even think they were for the illustration department. We had a typography class, and I think that was the only reason it was there. It had Photoshop on it, but it was really just there for InDesign, and I forget what the name of the other program was.
Was that Quark?
Not Quick. Quark. That's what. Yeah, Quark. So Quark and InDesign. That was like that was why computers were there. Photoshop was like an afterthought. So, yeah, they had just started getting them. But man, I wish I had either been there a couple years later or they had called on a little bit earlier, because I would have learned so more about what I'm doing now before I got into the field. But it's trial by fire once you start actually working. So that's what better way to learn.
That's the interesting thing about the time that we're in now, because you guys started out where you were probably the first generation where you could have amateurs and professionals, because of technology, mix together and have a conversation on these various message boards.
Yeah.
Because when I came along, there was no internet. So the only time I could ever meet any professional was once or twice a year when I went to a small show in the Detroit area, right? Because I couldn't afford. I didn't go to the Chicago Con until I was in my 20s, right? So all my teen years of wanting to break into the business, there was no message board. There was no way to talk with another professional, except that one or two shows I could that weekend go to in my car,
Right, exactly, yeah.
And now it's like 24 hours. There's, all these different platforms. You can write to just,
so weird.
Yeah. And what I find odd sometimes is that the younger student doesn't take advantage of that. They're almost afraid. I don't know. Do you get people writing you? Do you get young students writing you and asking you?
I used to get it a lot when I first started doing some Marvel stuff, and then they kind of dropped for a while. Actually, just probably 2 or 3 days ago, I got one of the first emails I gotten in a while. I mean, every once in a while, you get messages, people asking for for you to do commissions or work for them and blah blah blah.
Right.
But the actual art student asking for tips and things like that. How do I get into the field, or what do you use for this or that? That hadn't happened for a while, and then I had just done a post with a lot of the recent work that I had done, and somebody he's a middle school student, but I found out after the fact, or a little bit later, that he was actually a junior in high school. But he had reached out to me, and he was asking again, how do I get into that field? What are some schools that I should look at? And I'm like, thank you for asking, because I feel like, especially when I was younger, I didn't know any of this stuff. I was so green and I was so ignorant to the world outside of right here. And I wish I had asked those questions early on. And the kid I really give him a lot of credit, because it sounded like he knew what he wanted to do, and he really wanted to find out how to get there. So I took, I had a crazy deadline at the time, but I took a little bit of time to write a thorough email with links and stuff like that. Back in when it was I think it was my junior year of college. I hit kind of I'm sorry. It was the year after I left college. I was doing some collectible card game art. And I hit a brick wall. It's like I had taken on a few jobs and I didn't surround them at the time. And I was like, what do I do? I don't know how to paint this. I don't know how to set up this scene. And it was all fantasy based. It was Game of Thrones stuff. And I was like, well, what do I do? And I kept going back to, I don't know if you're probably familiar with Todd Lockwood. I kept going back to his artwork, and I was like, I was loving what he was doing. I was like, you know what? His email's on his website. Let me just stab in the dark, and you know what I mean? Let me just take a stab in the dark and see if he responds. I'll shoot him an email and see what happens. It can't hurt. And this is again before, you could just reach out to somebody on Instagram with no problem and DM somebody or whatever. Send him an email, and I said, this is what I'm working on. This is what I'm having problems with. Do you have any tips? Not expecting anything. He sent me back, I think it was 4 or 5 separate emails. One was a very detailed description on what he liked and what he didn't like, and where I could improve on the samples that I had sent him. Then he had sent me another email with paint overs, and I was like, oh my god, is he actually painting over my artwork? This this guy was a select time. And then he sent like 2 more emails after that, where I think he had actually written these emails to somebody else previously, but he kind of was like, he saw that it applied in my case as well. So he took those and he sent them to me as well. He's like, I thought these would help. And it was such a huge help to me at the time. And it was like, oh my God, you helped me see, break through my slump. And ever since then, that was the first time somebody had really taken the time on this level to really look at my work and show me, and the fact that he actually showed me by doing the paint over, what I could have better, was absolutely priceless. So after that, I was like, anytime anybody ever needs help with anything, I'm doing it. Like I want somebody else to have that experience. It was such a game changer for me at the time. So
I think that also goes back to early internet again, like when everything was so new and raw, and you were like, oh wow, there's this person that I'm really interested to, and there's a helicopter ladder hanging down from them that I can maybe climb up. I just have to grab onto it. Right. And I think now that everything is, there's so much that I think that fear has come back. Right. Before, when we were young, and there weren't any ways to get in. Now there's a million ways to get in, and now it's all on you. Right.
It's
well, also when you put down the ladder, trolls hop on it.
Oh my God, yeah, that's a good point. Well, and then that is a good point. A lot of times people will stop even looking at their messages because they're getting all of this noise, and you can't see the guy who just really, or a girl who just really wants to learn. They see your stuff and I'm like, please help. It's a lot of noise.
So, Mike, can we talk about if there was a transition into you working digitally, can you talk about that period in your career? Were you working traditionally and then you're like, screw it, I need to go get a Wacom tablet? Like, how did that happen?
And was that after school or was that in school?
So, yeah, it was a little bit of both, actually. It's kind of, and I'll explain. When I was in school, my goal was to master as far as I possibly could within those 4 years, the ability to paint, and also to, just be a good illustrator. But I really wanted to learn how to be a good oil painting illustrator. That was my thing. It was tough, it was right on the verge of when traditional was just literally, like, I would say at the year I was graduating, that was just starting to fade out and digital was starting to make its way in. So I would say, I think it was my 3rd year into art school, I did pick up the Wacom tablet. I had like a giant, like 12 by 12, it barely fit on my desk. Totally overcompensating. So I got that and I started playing around with it on my free time, but still doing traditional in school. And it wasn't until it was literally my first job out of school. This guy, let's see over here. There we go. The guy who painted that right there is a good friend of mine, Dan Horn. I met him, I think it was my senior year of college, and he's done work for, like, the Hardy Boys, Dragon Magazine, and I mean, you name it, he's done it. So he turns out he lives like right around the corner from where I live now. The space that I'm sitting in now is like a cardboard cutout, or I'm sorry, a replica of like his studio, but we have the same floor plan. But anyway, so when I befriended him, a job had come along for him where the guy was like, "Hey, I need an artist to do some like proof of concept work for a movie that they were working on." And my friend Dan couldn't do it, so he was like, "Hey, Mike, listen, this sounds like it's your wheelhouse. This is like right up your alley. Would you be interested?" And of course, I said, "Yeah," whether I thought I could do it or not. And I was like, "All right, great. So I'll have a couple weeks to work on this, right?" It's like, "Oh, no, we need this on Monday," and I'm like, "It's Friday, so I need to get this oil painting done over the weekend."
Yes.
And it was that was the turning point right there. It was like, okay, I'm doing this digitally. I was working in Corel Painter at the time, and I was like, all right, well, I'll try my best to keep this kind of traditional looking, which I still didn't pull off at the time. But I had to work digitally, and it was literally from that job on, it was all digital, and it was so sad. I still did oil paintings on the regular, outside of actual jobs, but then like jobs and life got in the way, and oils faded. So, I'm still super sad that I let that medium go. It's one of my favorites. I don't know if you can see, but I have like a pile of Rockwell books behind me. So that's
So,
my guy.
so Mike, with that, were you feeling kind of like you just almost said like a betrayal? Like, well, I want to do this traditional stuff, but
Yeah.
was it more about time versus access to getting things from your desk across the country quickly versus trying to get painting something on a canvas and then it's got to dry for a week and it
That's
just
what it
doesn't make
was. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. It
Mm.
was the drying time. I mean, I might have been able to knock it out on a piece of illustration board in oils, but and I could like there are techniques that you can scan it in pieces. You would use like pennies to hold your canvas above the scanner so that it wouldn't
Right.
actually sit on it. Um, so I knew those techniques, but I just knew that that process I'm such a perfectionist with the things you shouldn't be a perfectionist about. Like you'd have to scan it in like different pieces and then piece it all together in Photoshop. But I would spend so much time making every little brush mark line up perfectly that I would just get lost in it. So I was like, I might as well just start doing it digital, and negate that process. But I'll get back to oils after this illustration. That never happened.
I have a question from the room, Mike,
Okay.
and then we'll get back to the chat. Kendrick Menace says, do you think that we'll get to a point where digital illustration will completely take over the industry? I'm finding that more and more comics are moving to it rather than traditional pen and paper. Thanks, Kendrick. And I'd like to hear what both of you guys think. But
Um,
guess, Mike, you should start.
short answer, no. I really don't. Not completely. Digital is gonna. I think it's gonna take up a majority of how people work for so many reasons, especially because now, if you are a traditional painter, you can get you can get that same look digitally, and it's crazy. Like Paulo Rivera, for example, that was a guy who I would go to bed at night and just go, please don't let him start painting digitally, please, just to keep him working traditionally. And so they started posting some paintings, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't do this. This painting is so good. And did you use gouache for this one, or was this oils? And he was like, no, this is digital. I was like, no, but it was so real. And that's the gift and the curse is, now you can get a straight up traditional looking painting done digitally. That being said, just like hipsters are bringing everything else back, I think there are artists who are still holding on to that traditional medium, and they're trying to slip it in whenever they can. Like I don't know if you're familiar with like Julian Tedesco. He will he'll do he did a lot of like Spider-Verse covers and stuff like that. But he would do it in pencil, really nice, almost painterly pencil work, which sounds kind of funny. Then he would go over it with wash, and he would take this into Photoshop and mostly just kind of colorize them and then do a little bit of paint over on top of that. Um, but no matter what, I feel like there's still going to be those guys championing for the traditional medium, and
Like
there's some
Donato.
things you just can't replicate. Yeah, I absolutely.
Like
He's a
he's
guy.
crafted his whole thing so that he finds clients who just want traditional because he doesn't want to do the digital.
And the other side of that, which is there's an original that you can sell after the fact. That's so many of these guys are doing these illustrations and getting paid, like $1,000 for an illustration. And then once the illustration's done, they put it up online and sell it for 15, so that for guys who are, used to working traditionally, they know that the job itself is not where they're making their money. They're making their money from, selling the original after. So, it's just a vehicle to pump out some originals,
Yeah. I think that, well, I do the two strips. One, so we're saying digital, which is Judge Parker, one traditional, which is a Phantom. And I think that as a commercial artist, you are faced with two choices, right? You're faced with a choice that you have to please the client. So you have to deliver whatever job that the client wants in whatever way it wants. And right now, everybody wants digital because it allows them to do, you don't have to get it shot. You don't have to do any of that stuff. They can have ultimate changes forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, right?
Oh yeah.
Which is what every big corporation, all those stuff I'm doing for Disney, is going to be on a bedspread or a napkin,
Right.
or some underoos or something at some point, right? They've got all that commercial, all that stuff that then they have somebody else in some other place in Mexico sit there and make a digital, even more digital version of it, probably done in Illustrator or something that they can blow up and shrink down, right? It's all about licensing, because that's how the companies all make their money, is licensing.
Yeah.
So it's not a choice that we want. It's a choice that we have to, we want the job, do it. I still think at the same time, and this is something I noticed the last 2 years. So when Inktober came around, the last 2 years, there was all those kids in my class that I was teaching who all wanted to learn how to do pen and ink.
Nice. Yeah.
Because now they've seen October and they all want, hey, I want to try pen and ink, whatever. So I think as one thing goes away, something else comes back around, and one thing goes back away. I think we're going to see, well, just in my lifetime, right? So when I was in high school, figurative art was not big in the fine art world. It was crap. You had a few people like Philip Pearlstein and a couple people doing it. Now figurative art has resurged huge, and there are probably more people alive today at this very moment who want to learn how to draw and paint the figure than there have ever been in the total of art up until this point. There's
incredible.
Thousands and thousands of people, thousands of students. I mean, look at, you know, from all the people you see putting stuff on YouTube to this podcast, you know, talking to you guys, thousands of people want to learn how to draw the figure. They want to learn how to oil paint. They want to learn how to do it digital, but they also want to learn how to do it traditional. So really, to me, the deciding factor is always what the client wants. Because given your druthers, I still think many people over 40 would prefer to do it traditional because that's how they learned. Now people coming up who are teenagers start out with a tablet and they learn how to do that. So maybe they actually go to the traditional after. They don't start with the traditional, they go to the traditional after.
Yeah, and that's actually in a way I think that's fine. You know, I mean, I know the older I got, the more I would discover, you know, whether it be music or movies, my taste had changed. And you know, I was too young to appreciate it at the time. But then when I got older, it was like, oh, this is amazing. Why wasn't I into this before? And you know, if young artists are going through that, I applaud them, you know, because if they can find a way to circle back to it and discover it, you know, later on in life, I think that's awesome. And hopefully they, you know, can actually, if they're, you know, working artists, hopefully they can incorporate that into their work as well.
So that first job, which is like your digital, you were learning. You had to learn on the job, right? So you had to. It was like your birth of fire.
It was trial by fire for sure.
Right. So did the next job or the next 2 or 3, were they for the same company, or was it the same kind of thing, like trial by fire? Got to get it done, so I have to do it digital.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the first job was again, it was a proof of concept piece for some movie that somebody was working on. And so I did that. It was garbage. Just, you know, it's like, it was what I could do at the time. But after that, I had gotten work with a company called Fantasy Flight Games, and they were doing a game called A Game of Thrones. And, you know, something I'd never heard of.
Like
it was some weird card game that I had never heard of. Okay, I get it. You know, medieval type thing, whatever. I had no idea what the story was or anything like that, but the characters, when I would get because I mean, I'm sure you guys know with certain jobs that you've had, just get a description. It's just a snippet. It's a piece of the whole big picture. So I would get like this is this character, this is his motivation, this is, you know, this is kind of the scene that you would illustrate. And again, I didn't know who these characters were. This one little snippet that I got sounded interesting, so I would try and turn that into a full illustration. But what I wasn't ready for at the time was, you know, again, going back to what I had said earlier, I was a comic book guy. I was not ready to do full fantasy or high, especially not high fantasy at the time. So when I was doing these Game of Thrones illustrations, and even now when I look back at them, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I even attempted this, because I wasn't.
So how did you do your research? How did you do your research for that? How did you?
I literally, because I mean, again, going back to conceptart.org, a lot of the guys on that website were, you know, fantasy artists. There were guys like Justin Sweet and Vance Kovacs, and my eyes were just, there was, everything they did was pure eye candy. Todd Lockwood was posting on there, and I just couldn't get enough of it. So from those guys, I started to look at who was commenting on their posts, and I would look at their artwork, and it kind of snowballed, and all of a sudden I was falling in love with the fantasy genre. I was already a Frazetta fan, and that was kind of, I was exposed on that level, but that was, you know, that was not contemporary, even though everybody was still trying to rip Frazetta off, even in 2001.
He's like the base. He's like the base
right.
of everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So even though everybody was trying to rip him off at the time, people weren't, they were pulling certain things from his style, whether it be his compositions, his anatomy, but the actual approach and the actual, the way that people were painting these things was different because they're using Photoshop.
Right.
So that was, for me, even though I didn't have a lot of experience in the field of fantasy, I was lucky enough to have the internet, and that was, I mean, I just buried myself in the books that I had, you know, the Spectrum books. I would bury myself in those and online, and pull as much of it as I could. Email Todd Lockwood and see what he has to say about it. And then eventually, you know, I felt like I started to get my footing, and I started to kind of get an idea of like what the genre was and how to approach it digitally. I mean, the digital approach was really the hard part. I was trying to emulate a traditional style, which honestly I really wasn't pulling off, because I was seeing guys who really, they didn't paint, like, again, going back to, if you're familiar with Justin Sweet and Vance Kovacs, these were guys who were painting digitally, but they weren't thinking of it digitally. They were pulling the colors they knew to pull. They were using brushes that were simple. You know, they weren't using like the fancy painter brushes related bristles and stuff like that. They were just using hard and soft round brushes. But by the time they were done, it felt like it could have been, you know, 36 by 40, you know, oil painting. So, I mean, the digital medium it took a lot of getting used to, and especially when you're in a genre that you're not used to. But thank God for the internet at the time. It was, without it, I would have been pretty lost.
Mike,
honestly, as well. Good. No, good.
Well, I wanted to ask, so around that time, and you already had like a baked-in love of comics, there were a couple of people, or sometimes a project would come down the pike that was painted, right? I remember like Marvels came out like, you know, 6 or 7 years before that, which kind of changed the landscape as far as painterly comics. Were you looking at Alex Ross or any of those guys as
couldn't get enough? Marvels, Earth X, I mean, that stuff was anything Alex Ross did at the time, I was picking up. He had like a sketchbook he put out for Earth X, which, man, I would just like every page. I was like, how did he do this? But it gave me hope too, because at the time, before I had actually, you know, graduated art school, not going back, I did not graduate art school. It's a whole other story. But when I left art school, I up until that point, I had still planned to work traditionally. So guys like Alex Ross were, you know, those guys just, they gave me hope, and I was just so excited to do that when I got out. And of course, it didn't exactly work out as planned, but yeah, those guys were super inspiring at the time. Absolutely. Guys like John J. Muth, Kent Williams.
Mm-hmm.
When I would see the stuff they were doing, and again, going back to Phil Hale, he was doing those Vertigo covers that blew me away. To this day, I look at those paintings and I'm just like, how?
I had another question about, like, we're still kind of like circling the drain around the beginning of your digital career. Now, you said you started off using Painter, and I remember early iterations of Painter were real buggy. Like, the stuff did amazing effects, but usually people's computers weren't good enough to keep up with what the thing could do. And did you have a lot of like 11th hour crashes and things like that when you were trying to use Painter?
Or drag? You would make a stroke. And then,
yeah. Oh, you know.
Yep. You'd make a stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what? And then, like, that's not the stroke I want. You'd have to like Command Z and then make it
and
again.
There's another 10 to 15 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, so because I was still trying to retain that traditional look, I had planned to stay in Painter because I was loving.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing things with simulation and Painter that Photoshop hadn't even thought of at the time, and I was like, well, screw Photoshop. You know, it's all airbrushy or hard round brush stuff that I'm not interested in. Painter is where it's at, right? So, but and this, like you said, Mike, that was that 11th hour when you had to, my deadline's tomorrow. I have to get this into my art director tonight. Mail, which was a nice thing about, starting when I did. So I would, be buttoning everything up, putting in all the, the finishing touches. And it was just enough for Carell to be like, nope, I've had enough, and just bug out.
Goodbye.
Yeah, it's just like, no. And it doesn't matter what the program was, nobody had a good auto save, auto backup. Actually, I think Painter's was better than Photoshop's. Photoshop still sucks. But nobody had a good auto save function. Like, even if you had a file that it was auto saving to, you would go to open it up and be like, I don't know what this is. You can't open this. Like, why? That's the point of this.
Or so, worse,
yeah, I felt that.
Or worse, you would. And I've actually still had that happen. Now, there will be some conflict that's happening, but you're not sure. Your computer starts being a little bit buggy. You restart it, and then that thing that you just worked on that it said it was saving, it actually was not saving.
Oh, no.
It says it was saving, but it's like some backward, further back version of it.
Oh, no.
So
that's not.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
So yeah, that's the one drawback to digital.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because if you're inking something on a piece of paper, it doesn't crash. You might crash. You might pass out and go to sleep.
As long as you don't fall asleep and drool.
Right. But when you wake back up, your painting is not like, what? Wait a minute. Like the last 3 days. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was talking to Sienkiewicz for the magazine, there's a bunch of his old stuff that he lost because no matter how many backups he had, eventually that backup.
So sad.
Yeah. So do you multiple backup your stuff?
I mean, the answer should be yes. So I guess my one not saving grace, but the one thing that I do is most jobs that I work on, I'm keeping all my files in Dropbox. So they're still on my computer, but they're also in cloud in Dropbox. So God forbid something happens to my hard drive here, I should still be able to pull it from Dropbox as long as their servers haven't, exploded or something like that. I just recently bought a not an external, but no, it's an external, but it's like a RAID array. So there's like 4 drives, and then they all kind of back each other up.
Yeah.
I haven't set it up yet, but I went to go pick up a monitor off like Marketplace or something, and then the girl's like, hey, I have all this other computer stuff if you want to, if you're interested. And so I started looking. I was like, oh, I could really use one of these. Let me grab one now. So hopefully moving forward, I'll have, some hard copies of those files. But right now, honestly, there's a lot of hard drives that are barely functional, which are I'm probably going to lose files on those drives. And the only way they still exist is on the internet. So, but yeah. That's
a dangerous, that's real. And it's something that you don't really hear people talk about as much as the early aughts, when stuff crashed all the time, or on the forums people would say, "Oh, don't download the new update because it's not."
Update. Yeah, right.
Don't ever.
It'll just. In fact, it just happened to me. My computer screwed up, restarted, lost all my preferences. I had to redo those. Mimi helped me redo those because I couldn't remember how to do it. But then I noticed that it's doing that thing where you first put down the pen and makes a little dot or like a little stray.
Oh yeah. Oh, you're talking about Windows?
No, I don't. This is the latest version of the Wacom driver.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay,
Does
gotcha.
this random little dot like I'm making a dot here, or I'm making a stroke, and then there's like a
dot
little,
somewhere.
It's
I
have to adjust my screen sensitivity or something. But again, that's the thing that happens in the digital world.
Right.
They release some new thing, you don't know. All of a sudden, the thing that you were just used to doing, you can't do the way you were used to because the programmers changed some
Which
things.
Is something you really don't have to deal with in a traditional medium. Like your worst problem was, I ran like oils. I was like, I ran out of turpentine or mineral spirits or something like that. So I can't thin my paints, or my brush is on its last leg. So I need to get a new one. The worst that would happen is you'd have to wait a day and go to the store tomorrow. There are times when I have bugs. I just spent a couple $1,000 on some software recently. I'm not going to name the software, but I dropped crazy money on some software that just stopped working after like a week of using it, and I couldn't figure it out. I finally figured it out this night. But that, this is almost a month later. I lost about a month's worth of being able to use this stuff because I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working anymore. And literally all it was I deleted a folder, and it was, I opened the program up and it just created the folder again, and everything was fine. So I was like, cool, there's what's that,
so
like, I don't know, $200 or $300
right. So you're going back to another forum to read about, has anybody else had this problem
over and over? Oh yeah, I was all over the internet. I mean, and the weird thing was, a lot of people had complained about this problem, but almost nobody posted a solution to this one random obscure post. And I was like, all right, I'll give this a shot. So I tried it and it worked.
There was one Yoda out there.
Right.
One. So why don't you give us a little bit of your step-by-step of your process of how you, because I imagine it must be fairly similar now. I mean, you do like, thumbnail. Are you doing everything digital?
So, it's a good question because it depends on what field I'm working in. So if I'm working in comics, if I'm doing a comic book cover or like a paperback cover, which I actually haven't done in a really long time now. But if I am doing those, it's, I do quick, loose sketches in Photoshop. I keep them as loose as possible. It's usually in black and white with maybe a little bit of color and gray tones. And I'll submit those, I'll submit a couple different versions of those sketches, and the editor pick with the one that they like. Once they pick the one they like, of course, that's the one I end up refining. I'll do a color sketch. Sometimes I'll send the color sketch, and sometimes I'll just keep going, and from that point on, I'll send like work in progress as I go, and hopefully it will work out the bugs of whatever the editor or art director is not liking before I get to the end. But if I'm working now, I've been working in the video game industry, which, by the way, is something I never planned to do. Video games was something I thought that's for the guys who are all 3D, or they're all, I don't know. It just seemed foreign to me. And then a couple years ago, I had done a poster for a comic book shop around here. Shout out to Level Up Entertainment. I did a comic book poster for those guys. They were doing a free comic book day event, and we're like, what, like a Civil War, like all the movies that were coming out at the time. It was like Civil War, Deadpool, Batman versus Superman, X-Men Apocalypse. What if we had them all in one illustration? I'm like, this was a second poster I was doing for them. I was like, that is amazing. I need to do that. I don't even care what you're paying. Let's do it. Right. So So I did this illustration for them, and I was really happy with it. By the time I was done, the pay was like, man, it was fine.
Yeah.
Which wasn't the point. It was like, I enjoy the process. And then I posted it on ArtStation, and that's just probably a year later, maybe more. One of the guys over at Ubisoft sent me an email like, "Hey man, my name's so and so. You know, I saw your work online. I really like it. Would you be interested in doing stuff for Ubisoft?" And I thought somebody was messing with me, because I was like, "Why would Ubisoft want anything to do with this guy from like New Jersey? You know, like working on some random projects." And so I replied, and he replied back, and it turned out he was legit. So next thing you know, I'm working for Ubisoft on a freelance basis. So I'll try to keep this long story short. Over the next couple of years, I had been working for them on a pretty regular basis, to the point where it was really exclusive. I didn't have time to do anything else. And there was a point in that process where I had gotten a cover job. They were like, "Hey, we want you to do I was doing all like concept stuff, like pre-production stuff for the packaging art for a video game. So when you buy the game off the shelf, when you see the art on the cover, I was the one doing the sketches for those to help the guys doing the final artwork have something to put on, you know? So we would do the concept. When I was doing that, they were like, "Hey, would you be interested in doing a finished cover?" And I was like, "Yeah, getting to see like my artwork on the shelf, that would be amazing. You know, it's not just sketches anymore." And they threw me they're like, "Here's a bunch of the models from the video game. You could use them in the illustration." I was like, "Oh, great, thanks." I had no idea how to use them. I didn't know what format they were. I didn't know how, like 3D was completely foreign to me. So it was literally that day that I was like, okay, I need to start, at least I need to download some kind of 3D software. So I downloaded a couple different, programs, barely used them at all. Cause it was really like Greek to me. There's nothing intuitive about working in 3D when you jump in with no, knowledge ahead of time. So it just kind of sat there for a while, and then later on, a couple other jobs come up where I thought 3D I would benefit from using 3D for it, and that's when I started to realize this is something that not only I think would benefit my artwork that I'm doing for this company, but it would help open doors for me, both with this company and anybody that I decide to do work for outside of them. So 3D. Even though I'm still using everything that I've been using as a 2D artist, I'm also now incorporating things like photo bashing and, getting like a 3D model, posing it, lighting it, and then I'll take that model and drop it into either a background that I photo bashed, painted, and then once you have everything kind of thrown together, you get to paint over top of it. So the process that I'm using now is so different from the way I used to work. And there's times when it's just quicker to have models, light them real quick, pose them. And a lot of times you get caught up in things like perspective, right? Especially like foreshortening of a character. You don't want it to look funny to your clients. So,
especially with guns and all that stuff.
Oh, I'm the worst with guns. Anything geometrical, forget it. So it's being able to use these models, and it started out as like, okay, I'm going to use this just for reference, so I'll pose it and light it for reference, and then I'll use that to draw and paint from. Of course, there was a point where I was like, well, nobody else is going to see this art. This is literally just pre-production concept stuff. So it doesn't hurt if I just use the model. And yes, so a lot of times I'll do my sketching in B and photo bash it all together at the end.
Yeah.
And it's weird, but I think for the work that I do now, it just makes sense. Whereas
some of those costumes are so complicated when you see stuff. You've got all those guns with all the detail, and they probably want it to look not like a Marvel Comics version of. They wanted to look like the real version of the gun, foreshortened, aiming at you, and you can still see all
the guys who work. Yes.
Can I put up your ArtStation site?
Yeah, please. Absolutely.
Continue talking. I'm just going to bring this up.
It's funny because a lot of the stuff I do is Tom Clancy related. So there's like Rainbow Six Siege, The Division, Ghost Recon, stuff like that. And it's all so tactical and technical. And there's a lot of things I didn't know going into these games. Like if I would do a sketch where, you know, I grew up on action movies. I was like, you know, a young kid with my dad watching every Stallone, you know, Schwarzenegger movie out there, and Dolph Lundgren, whatever. It's like all the guys in the Expendables now, those are the guys I was watching when I was a kid. So when I would draw a character in that, yeah, that was the inspiration that started, you know, my work at Ubisoft. But when I was, you know, starting these sketches, I would draw a character and he's holding a gun and he's like, you know, he's like, yeah, I got it all out here. And my art director was like, a guy in the position never hold a gun like that. He would hold a gun like this. Is if you're holding your arm out here, you're just asking to get hit by a bullet, you know? So he would tuck it in, keep it close to the body. And there's all these little things that I picked up over time, working in the field, you know, it was all.
Don't insult SEAL Team 6 with your shoulder
right,
out.
That's what it was. You're right, exactly. Because the guys even a lot of the guys who play the game, they know these things. Like they're so in tune with the technical aspects of this stuff. It's not always just a game. A lot of times it's them getting to kind of live that life that, you know. I mean, it's the same thing with any video game. You're living this as special.
Your second life, yeah. Right.
So.
Yeah. No John Woo.
So when I would do a
turn sideways,
no doves flying away in the background, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So here's a good one. That's in this. You spot them.
Wait,
so did this start as a sketch and then you posed a 3D model, or did you draw this all out by hand?
Yeah, this was all from scratch. So, you know, obviously, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the work that I had done with Liefeld on Deadpool, but we did when Deadpool came out. It was 2008. They had, you know, put out the Deadpool 1 book, and Rob, this is when we were doing some one of his personal projects. He was like, "Hey, man, would you be interested in doing a Deadpool cover?" And I'm like, "Whoa, yes, absolutely." So, and I didn't realize at the time it was like issue 1, so that was also cool. But we had done this cover, and I was really happy with it. By the time we were done, I was super excited. And then, you know, over time, I grew, you know, and my abilities changed. And looking back at it now, I still have a great appreciation for the job itself, and there's a lot of things that I really like about it. But I kept looking at it going, oh man, there's so many things I want to change. And one day I was like, you know what? I'm going to take our original concept. Rob had sketched it out in pencil originally. And I painted over top of it. And so I took that original concept and I was like, the movie's coming out now. What would our concept look like with a movie treatment? So yeah, this was actually from scratch. I did a quick tracing of our original cover and then just started tweaking it little by little, real loose kind of line drawing. And you know, actually, Jamar, if you scroll down, I think there's a little bit of a time lapse video.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, let me play this.
So this will kind of show you, yeah, loose drawing, blocking in colors and lighting. The composition and perspective were a tough one for this one.
For the buildings in the background, did you actually use reference from the movie, or did you find buildings that were kind of like that? Or
yeah, it was reference from the movie. I started, you know, it was right after it came out on video, and you know, I had a digital download of it, so I started pulling screenshots from it, and I tried to emulate that look as much as possible. And the nice thing about this was, again, I got to revisit something that I had done like 10 years earlier, but I also got to kind of learn lighting and you know, color palette of film. You know,
right.
the way, especially that movie, it was kind of very desaturated, or like a very cool gray, red,
right,
color palette throughout the entire movie, and black, of course, throughout the whole movie. That was it. so you know, a lot of times I have a tendency to overdo the colors, and this really forced me to kind of pull back and rein it in a bit.
This is my favorite with the scrolls, and then they're not scrolls anymore.
Yeah, that was for placement, right? So
Yeah, and Mike, can you talk about? As I'm super interested in what's going on the at the bottom of the image. Where is this? Where you're getting art directed by Rob? Like, we need more goons, or we need
no,
less
this was
goons.
all.
So this is all
Yeah,
you.
this is a personal piece. This was
Okay.
this is just something I did in my free time, and actually I had started it, and it sat there. You know, I got like, I don't know, 25-30% through, and it sat there for a while, and because, you know, other work, and then work slowed down, and I was like, great, I finally have some time to revisit some of the stuff that was just kind of hanging in limbo.
Mhm.
So I took some time to actually finish this one, which I'm really happy I actually did. But yeah, this was all just a personal project. See down at the bottom under his foot, it says Caprotti after Liefeld.
Yeah.
So I showed this to Rob, and he his first. I don't know if you guys know Rob or not,
Mm.
but I showed it to him, and his first comment was, "You're going to put after Liefeld down there, right?" I was like, "Of course," you know. He's like, "No," he's like, "No, seriously." He's like, "It looks great, nice job." I was like, "Thanks, man."
You know what? I wanted
But
to show. I wanted to show your the
man, I haven't
Deadpool
upped this page in a really long time.
poster, which I think a lot of people saw. Um, can you talk a little bit about this
Yeah.
project right here?
Yeah. So going back to the one we were just talking about, Rob and I, everyone, the way that our relationship is now is whereas before I talked to Rob just about every day in one form or another, and because we were working on so many things at the time, and then our kind of paths started to just naturally, as they would, started to kind of go in different directions.
Mm.
Um, and every once in a while, we'll kind of circle back and be like, "Hey, you know, it'd be really cool to work." So I had pinged him, and I was like, "Hey, remember that Deadpool like homage I did to our cover?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I thought it'd be really cool if we did something else like that, like movie style,
Mhm.
give it the movie style treatment." And he was like, "We should absolutely do that. Let's figure something out." Um, and then he wanted to revisit, obviously, the New Mutants cover, and I was he pitched it to me, and I was like, "This is going to be so much fun." He's like, "I do the cover, but we're going to have all of our movie characters, and obviously there's some certain characters we're going to have to omit because they're not in the movie."
Right.
So he did usually the way we work is Rob would send me a fairly loose sketch, because we've worked together for so long. He knew where he needed to put detail, and he knew where to just let it go. So he would send me that, and same deal with this as with the other one. I would just do a quick kind of block in some colors and get the general lighting of it. And this was one where I kept sending him works in progress as I went along, because I wanted him to be okay with it. There was no, by the way, there was no place for this yet. Like, we were just doing it for ourselves at this point.
Mhm.
And I know in the back of his head, he was like, you know, there's a lot of stuff coming up we're probably going to be able to use it for, but right now we were just doing it for ourselves. And so I would send him works in progress as we went along. And this was a lot of fun though, because you know, I love the costume design, and this movie itself was just so cool. The way, I mean, Josh Brolin, what a cool looking guy, man. And that costume, like you can't see it here, but I got so into the detail on the costume, like all the piping on there, every little
Mm.
nook and cranny. I was in there trying to replicate that because it was so much fun to paint. But yeah, so we finished the illustration. He was super happy with it, which made me very happy. I felt
Mhm.
like, if Rob is, if he let me play with his baby and didn't screw it up, then I guess I did something okay.
You didn't break
Um,
the baby, yeah.
right, exactly. So
So what
once
is
we
this
were
painted
done,
in? What's this
this was
painted in?
all Photoshop.
Okay.
Oh,
And
so
now,
going back
go ahead.
real quick, just to go back to what we were talking about before, with Corel Painter and the lag and the crashes and stuff like that. Um, there was a point where I just had enough. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And if you guys know Craig Mullins, he was doing everything that he was doing in Photoshop, and I couldn't. I was like, if you're able to pull this off in Photoshop, I might just have to make the jump. And that's exactly what happened. So I dropped Corel because of all the bugs, and went over to Photoshop, and that's what I worked in exclusively when at that point. So this is all Photoshop.
One of our regulars, Britt, is in love with your wedding invitation. Are you okay with me showing that real quick?
Absolutely, yeah. This is going back to my Rockwell fascination or infatuation, I should say.
All right, thanks. So you want to talk about this real quick, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. The joke here, as you can see, I'm standing on a Coca-Cola crate. My wife is 6'1". I'm 5'7" on a good day. So, I shot all the reference for this, and I actually have that crate, and I actually stood on it for that reference. So it was actually a lot of fun. But we both, I have a long love going back to, growing up, spending so much time at my grandma's house and all the Rockwell stuff she had there. And then as an adult, rediscovering him, and just, I was one of those things at school at UArts when we went to the Guggenheim Rockwell exhibit, and I got to see these things in person, and it changed. I don't know.
He was such a fantastic painter that you don't get to see the surface in the reproductions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was so much lost in the reproduction. And actually now when I buy books, my wife makes fun of me a lot of times because I'll pick it up and I'll just put it back down. She's like, "What, you didn't like it?" I'm like, "The reproductions are terrible." Like, but it's like, I don't blame the printers. There was limitations, but there's so much lost, which I have compromised on some of the books because they just have such a wealth of his collection in there. But when I saw those things in person, that changed my, I don't want to say it changed my life, but it changed my outlook on Rockwell and I learned so much about being an illustrator once I rediscovered Rockwell. And this was, I finally got a chance to, I had never done a real, even though I had incorporated some of the liked about Rockwell into my art, I have never done a full Rockwell tribute. And this was so much fun. And what a good way to, be able to do it.
No, that's great, man. That's a great image right there. I am going to try to put you on the spot here. Well, you know what? One thing that I was enjoying was this Game of Thrones speed up piece you had. I just want to let that play. Now, is this some of your older work? Where were you working in with this? Because I want to show the YouTube.
Yeah, it was posted around. I mean, I had done this around the time I had posted it. So this was the first time I had painted anything Game of Thrones related in probably 10 years or so, 7 or 10 years. But it was toward the end of the series, the costumes and the lighting they really started to refine their style. And this character, for example, she obviously evolves. If anybody watches the series, she evolves so much from her first time on screen to her last time on screen. And I loved the lighting and the costume design here. So, and it's a very limited palette. It's very limited and subtle lighting. So a lot of, obviously here it's on the screen, it's showing up so dark, but that's kind of how it was in the series as well.
Right. Yeah,
that was a challenge for me because it's so easy to go extreme. It's so easy to have that orange in the background just be super saturated and just take over the painting. Really hard to keep it subtle and keep it from going, as we would say, working in oil straight out of the tube.
Now, here's one thing I would ask you, Mike, that maybe some people who don't understand the kind of the mastery you need to have to do anything art related. Have you ever run into people who seem to think that doing digital work is some sort of easy process, or you press the art button and then your picture is finished?
It's funny you use that expression because I thought I made that up.
No, it's
That is
it's a real thing. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's and that's a real train of thought, and that's why. And when I can, I do post like works in progress, or like I don't ever do tutorials, but I like to show the process every once in a while because the people. I mean, it's not their fault. They're just not. They're not always as exposed to this to art or the process as obviously guys like you and me. So they know that computers are made to make our lives easier, so they kind of assume that well, of course, if you're going to work digitally, it's just to make the process easier. And of course, to a certain extent it does. I don't have to scan my painting. I don't have to worry about putting pennies down on my scanner so that I don't get oil paint all over it. And I can just email the final product that night. But
but everything else is still your hand.
That's right.
You don't go, computer, please finish the background. I'm going to go ride my bike.
Come from somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, and even when I'm doing things like when I do the video game art, which is a lot of, again, 3D and photo bashing, I don't take myself seriously enough as a 3D artist. Let me just say, I'm not a pro when it comes to 3D art. Like I kind of fumble my way through it. That being said, I know that what I'm doing, I must be doing something right when it comes to 3D. And again, I don't do a lot of modeling. I do more like I take a model, a character, and I'll put the textures on, and I'll do the lighting, and I'll do the posing. To me, it seems like, oh, that's the easy stuff. But it's worth something apparently, because the lead artist that I work with at Ubisoft, she's mentioned multiple times, and at first I thought it was a joke. She's mentioned multiple times, like, what do we have to do to get you up here in Montreal? I'm like, you can't be serious. Like, I'm just doing my job. But again, it has some value to her and to the company. So I guess it's not something that just everybody can do by dragging your mouse around a screen and clicking some buttons.
So when you got the 3D, and you should probably also explain a little bit what photo bashing is to the audience, because they don't really understand. Because that's a big thing probably within the last 4 or 5 years, which people weren't really doing that as much before. Yeah. So why don't you sort of explain what that is?
So photo bashing is you have an idea of what you want to do. For this, for example, this is actually fully painted with the exception of, I think, the guns in the background. But if I were trying to create this scene and I only had a day or two to work on it, because the client is like, hey, we need to get this concept done so we can send it to the brand team and have them approve it. What I would do is I would, find maybe a picture of a dining room or a cabin or something like that, and a table. And then I would find another picture of the buffet on the left, or, I might have some 3D models that I'll be able to use as characters to sit around the table. So I'll pose and light them real quick. So I'll take all of those elements and I'll drag in the background, and I'll drag in the buffet, and I'll drag in my 3D models and kind of lay them all on top of each other. And you try and make them all fit in the scene as far as the lighting and the composition and the perspective. And what doesn't fit automatically, you go in, paint over it, and you adjust it. You use different adjustment layers and things like that to adjust the lighting and the colors, so that everything, when you're done, hopefully it looks cohesive, and it looks like, it might not look, there was some photo bashing involved there, or like somebody used some cut and paste aspects to it. But by the time you're done, you should have gotten the message across of what the client's looking for. They hopefully they got the scene that they were expecting to get.
So you might find like a picture of
kind of a cut and paste.
Right. So you might find a picture of a turkey or that bottle or the plants on the table or something, just that you could paint over or hybrid use, right? Just to kind of speed up the process. Because that's something I guess I've heard for a few years before, but I guess now, because more and more people are doing digital painting and not everyone has the drawing chops, I heard an old student of mine said that people, it's like, your skill is not necessarily painting. Your skill is pasting all the swipe as they would say in the old days, together to make your thing, then
Right, yeah.
painting on top.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking
Absolutely,
at somebody's pictures from a barbecue, and then like, you know, some guy on the back of a boat fishing, and you're like taking all these various things and slamming them together.
And it's hilarious, actually. A lot of times, you find, again, using this photo bashing method, you'll find some of the what you need in some of the weirdest places. So, like you said, it might be I just needed a guy holding a spatula, you know, while he's talking to his family. But I can't find what I'm looking for on, you know, in like Shutterstock or a stock photo website. And I just, you know, in some Google image search, some guy posted a picture of him and his family having a barbecue. And I'm like, that's perfect, you know? So I'll like cut that out and drop it into my scene and paint over top of it and, you know, adjust the color so it looks belongs there. But I wouldn't do that for a finished illustration, but for pre-production stuff where you're just trying to convey an idea, you're trying to pitch, like with this illustration, for example, like I didn't do this digital artwork. I did everything that led up to it. But for this job, you know, we were pulling, you know, backgrounds and just stock photos of like Cuba, which is, you know, this doesn't take place in Cuba, but it was kind of supposed to be Cuba-esque. We're pulling these Cuba images like Havana and stuff like that, and then I'm cutting, you know, I'm saving all these pictures of Giancarlo Esposito and dropping them in there, and I'm, you know, there's all these different elements that I'm cutting and pasting into the scene, and again I just go in and I paint over top of it and help everything look cohesive. But the client doesn't care how you create the image, they just need to know what it's supposed to look like. So by the time you're done, they want a clear idea of what we're trying to do.
Right.
And how I got to that point makes no difference to them whatsoever.
Right. So again, I think that's one of the things about illustration, that the student has to sort of learn to understand, because we start out when we're younger trying to do things that we like. That's what attracts us. You know, you want to draw Spider-Man or Deadpool or Bugs Bunny or whatever. That's what fuels you. And then you get a job, but your job is to please the client in the way that they need. And what you're trying to do is sort of at times almost negotiate with yourself.
You have to.
Your desire, what makes you still excited. So, and sometimes, you know, I'm sure you've done, there's a job that you're not excited about. You just want the money. Yeah. You know, you need to make a living, right? Oh, yeah. So not every job is a job that's like scratches all your art itches, right?
Right.
And, you know, everybody's working digital because that's what they want. If tomorrow they said we want oil paintings, everybody would throw the computer to the side. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I mean, this is the fact that everybody's going digital is, I mean, it's similar to the classic, you know, what pencil do you use, what brush do you use, what do you use, blah, blah, blah. Everybody thinks that if they use that thing, that's going to make them the good artist, right? So when people started doing things digitally, it felt like there was some kind of magic behind it, right? You know, there's people are using Photoshop, people are using 3D programs, and they're creating these images, and you're like, oh my God, that's how you do that. And it's like, no, that's not how you do that. Those are the tools you use, but you have to have the ability to know how those things work together. You have to have the ability to know how to create the scene. You have to have the ability to, like, there's a lot of guys working in film and video games who, again, are using that photo bash method, but they know exactly how to how to tell the story, really, with the mood, the lighting, and the colors. You know, it doesn't matter if you're taking something photorealistic and putting them all together. If you're not telling a story, if the colors or the composition, if that's not delivering what the writer wants, then it doesn't matter. You know, it's just a realistic looking image. There's nothing else behind it. So yeah, I mean, it, having the ability to work in that medium does not make you. It doesn't make it good art. It doesn't make it. Um, it doesn't even make it what the client wants sometimes. So, and I think that's where a lot of young artists kind of get hung up. They get hung up on the process and forget about the technical process, and forget about the right way to tell the story.
And I suppose the technical process is probably always changing because programs are changing and the needs of the client is changing. I mean, what you were doing at Ubisoft 5 years ago is probably not what you're going to be doing 3 years from now because the way they
Even
build their
from
games change,
Oh
right? The
yeah.
way they build their games. And so how did you learn the 3D stuff enough? Were you using SketchUp? Are you using Maya? I mean, like if they send you a soldier and they say,
Right.
okay, these are the guys that are going to be on this thing, right? This scene.
Mhm.
You have to take them and then pose them enough that you can get. So were they teaching you, or did you do tutorials? How did you learn that?
No, they I started incorporating 3D into my work with them almost as a surprise to them. They didn't know that was because I'd always been, I used my comic book method for creating my sketches for them. I would do it in line art and I would do it in grayscale to start off with, and then a little bit of photo bashing came into play, worked its way in there. But 3D itself, I started learning that kind of on the side on my own to help with some of a couple personal projects I was working on. And I think I was starting to learn a little bit. Like Blender is what I use mostly at the moment. I now have Maya and 3D Studio Max because those are the industry standard, and Maya is actually the main software that Ubisoft is using. But I use Blender now because that's what I started with. It was free. It was the thing that I could download and usability on. So, and I just learned that in my spare time. I watched. I would just have Blender tutorials just playing in the background as I was working, so it would just kind of like subconsciously seep into my brain, right?
You weren't listening to
And
music. You were listening to Blender tutorials.
yeah, it was true. I mean, that was. I mean, obviously, I put music and movies on in the background and some podcasts every once in a while, but you know, the when I realized that 3D was something that was important to the field that I was working in, I was like, I got to figure this out. Otherwise, I'm going to get left behind. And I'm really glad I did because man, I really enjoy working in 3D. So much more to it than I realized. Like for example, this sketch that's playing here, um, that was again going back to that Gil. I'm drawing a blank now, but like going back to that kind of vintage illustration
Like
artwork
Loomis
that I
or Sunblum with
yeah, some
Coca-Cola.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. So I love being able to channel those guys, and I love being able to kind of like, I would create like a canvas texture in Photoshop and then try and retain that like painterly bristle brush canvas play as I went along. But now in the field that I'm in more than anything, being video games, I'm finding that I'm really enjoying this completely different process at just as much. I'm able to. It's almost like playing with toys. It's kind of funny, like you have this 3D model, and that kid that was playing with the GI Joes on my floor in my parents' house. Like I almost feel like I'm doing that for a living. I have these 3D models. I get to set a scene. I get to put the guns in their hand. I get to make it as cool looking as physically possible, and all the lighting and all the colors are there because there's a lamp lighting them, and because they're in an environment where light is bouncing off the ground and bouncing off the walls, creating this bounce lighting. So it's really cool getting to play kind of director of photography in like this virtual world,
Right.
which as a kid I would see that stuff in the making of like movies and animated movies and stuff like that. I would see like what they were doing, and I'm like, that is so cool. Like, I wonder if I'll ever get to do that. And now that I have the opportunity, I was like, I might as well take advantage of it now while I can. So, I'm really starting to jump in head first with 3D, which is a lot of fun.
So you ended up not in comics in the way that you thought or you were planning.
Right.
You're ending up in games, and you're sort of ended up doing 3D, which is so you're ended up doing all these things that you
kind of going with
plan.
the flow.
Right. Yeah. Which again is one of the things I think is important for the student, the young person, to realize, is because you have an idea of where you are today. You're 17. By the time you graduate college at 23, a lot of the stuff is going to be very different. And in fact, I remember reading a couple years ago, there was a guy, there was an article, and it might have been the Post or something, but he said that, 30 years from now, all these JPEGs, all these photos that everybody has taken may no longer exist, because they're only going to be able to be displayed as long as there is a machine that will display that particular file format. So all these people taking billions and billions of photographs every day with their cell phones. 30 years from now, no one may be able to look at them unless somebody still makes something that shows a JPEG.
Right. And even then, some files get corrupt. I have so many files that are little by little just disintegrating digitally. I'll have a folder full of I'll save my work as I go in different versions. So version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But sometimes I'll go to those folders, especially like the stuff back in the day that I was doing with back in like 2008, 9, 10. I'll look folders, and like 3 or 4 out of the 25 files just don't work anymore. Like I can't open them, and I don't know why. It's just the nature of the beast. It's zeros and ones that there's one day where
one zero says, "See ya."
Right. Nope, I'm not. Forget about me. I don't exist anymore. So yeah, there is. There's no way to really. I don't think they're going to save everything forever. Even when we talk about the cloud, it's not like these files are sitting out there in the ether. The cloud is just it's a server bank at some company. It's literally a giant room full of servers that all they do is hold data. And God forbid, that place catches on fire. Then what? They might have
a meteor
building.
A meteor hits it, flies over, and blasts that part of the planet or something, the size of a refrigerator, and then everybody's screwed because all those data farms are gone.
It's a good thing that we didn't have as much stuff going on like pre-2000, because people would have been like, "Oh, those are going to be gone forever."
Well, I remember learning Flash, 1990 somewhere in there. Taking classes to learn Flash, and then like nobody.
Yeah, Flash was huge in '96.
Yeah. So I took, because I was working in animation, I was doing storyboards. I thought that maybe I might eventually there was a possibility of me moving to LA at that time, maybe trying to work my way to being a director. I had opportunities. I ended up not going that way. I ended up going back to school. But you think, or like Quark, when I first started putting out Draw, right? I put everything together, many issues myself in Quark. And then eventually, I got smart and I hired somebody who was much better at layout than I was. But, right. But, you learn a technology because you need it to make something.
That's right.
And then one day that technology changes, right? And so the way you make your picture, if it's dependent upon that particular program, right? So are you constantly are you updating your brush pack? Are you updating your technical? Do you use a different tool set today than you did 5 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yes, definitely. Altogether, as far as all the different software that I use now, for sure. before I was using Photoshop, that was it. I mean, I started using SketchUp a little bit every once in a while to kind of like, for example, the dining room table, again, going back to Rockwell, that dining room table scene that you saw that you had shown from my ArtStation page, Jamar. That was I couldn't figure out the perspective the way I wanted it to. Every time I started to set up the scene, it just felt weird, because when you saw the Rockwell painting, it's a little bit, his perspective is a little bit stylized. It's not, you know, if you put a dot in the middle of the screen and you did 1 point perspective, not everything is going to line up the way, you know, that it should in real life. So I had to kind of like compromise, and understand the fact that like the perspective wasn't going to be perfect, but I couldn't really wrap my head around some of the things that were happening in the scene. So I laid it out real quick in SketchUp. So this is one place that I used SketchUp at the time. That was kind of the early use of 3D for me. It was literally just to kind of, my perspective has always been terrible. So it's something I still have a hard time with. But yeah, now today, I mean, I'm using Photoshop. I'm using Maya, 3D Studio Max, Blender. What else am I using? I feel like I'm still jumping around between different programs, but those are the ones that I use on a regular basis.
So if you created the background in SketchUp, then would you create the figures in Maya or one of the other ones and then stick them on top in Photoshop? Is that how you would kind of do it?
So in this example here, literally was doing was I would create basic shapes as just to kind of set up the perspective. It was all just blocking things in, and then everything else was just paint over. So I would, this is hand painted except for the fact that I set up some of the perspective in SketchUp. But the way I would work now is I will do most of my character work in 3D, and I'll do most of my lighting, all of my for the characters in 3D, and I'll use Blender most of the time right now. But eventually, I'll take that into Photoshop, and that's when I'll either do the background patch by just painting it, or if it's like, for example, I just did a scene in an urban setting where, you know, it's almost like a Times Square type setting where there's lights everywhere, people, cars, buildings. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to get 4 or 5 concepts done over the weekend if I have to do this from scratch. So I would find as many images of this location as I could online, and literally either drop them in and leave them as is and just kind of adjust the lighting and the colors, or if I couldn't make it work the way I wanted to, I would literally just kind of fake the perspective and kind of cut and paste. And that's, I think, where photo bashing, a lot of times people think you just, you know, you drop a thing in there and you leave it alone. But if you still have that artistic eye and you're still approaching it from somebody who wants to do something stylized, if you drop it in there and leave it alone, it's going to be kind of boring. You should at least drop it in there and tweak it, even if you're just like exaggerating the perspective, or sometimes you have to fake things. Like, for example, if I'm doing something for a game that takes place in like New York or Washington, D.C., they want to see certain landmarks, even though they're not visible together. You know, it's like if you were doing France, you know, you could have the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower, you know, and from one perspective, you know, you shouldn't be able to see the Eiffel Tower, but they're like, no, it's back there. It's like, no, it's not. But on the cover of the game, you want it to look like it's back there, because it's like, this is where this game takes place. It takes in France. So,
it's like one of those Olympus is down movie posters where they have like the Statue of Liberty crashing and the Washington Monument and the Capitol all, you know,
You hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what it is. I mean, a lot of what we do, like, so, I mean, my position at Ubisoft, I'm freelance, but it's pretty much, it's like full time. I'm doing it a ridiculous amount of hours a week. But my position is a key artist. So that movie posters are key art. So you have, it's the exact same approach. The things that I'm doing for them is the same thing that they're doing for movie posters, but I'm trying very hard and this is a battle that me and my art director both fight on a regular basis, is like, try not to do the cliche crap where it's just like a bunch of characters either standing next to or behind each other. It's just like
the Spielberg shot where everybody's
please.
looking. Yeah.
Oh, just can we get a little bit more clever?
Blue on one side, red on the other side.
Yes, exactly right. Yep, that's all it is. And it's like here's all the stars. These are all the celebrities. Everything else can there. That shouldn't be the case. Obviously everybody's going to see this movie because Tom Cruise is the lead actor, but it's also a good story. So why don't you tell a little bit of that in the poster too?
Mm-hmm.
So we try to keep that in the key art for the video games. But like you said, sometimes they're just like, we want it to be the Statue of Liberty. We want it to be this, and we want it to be that, all in the same shot. And you're just like, sure, whatever you want. People are going to laugh at it when we're done, but we'll do it because that's our job.
What is to give people an idea also too, because you're working freelance, what is your typical, how long is your typical work day? How long is your typical work week? I know a lot of people I think that you just work, you work 5, 6, 7 hours a day, then you close your laptop and then you're done, which I imagine is probably not true.
Never the case. It's kind of interesting. I don't know how many people who are watching this video are familiar with me. I know I'm more behind the scenes guy, stuff that I did for some of the comic books, but for me, it's kind of interesting because I still have a day job. I still work 9 to 5. I still work in something completely unrelated to everything else I do after 5. So my day is wake up in the morning, go to my 9 to 5 job. I work in the medical imaging field, which is really weird, CTs and MRIs. So that's what I do from 9 to 5. And then I come home, eat dinner, spend time with the family, and lock myself down here in the basement where I work until, probably shouldn't say out loud what time I work till, because I hope my boss isn't watching this. But
I know I can call him at 4. I know I can call him at 4 in the morning now.
Well, it's funny because my art director, he's as bad as I am when it comes to the Ubisoft work, because I'll submit something at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and it gets later than that, but sometimes I'll submit it that hour. That he'll respond immediately. I'm like, why are you still awake? Or if I submit something at like 6 in the morning because I pulled an almost all-nighter, I'm thinking, they should definitely be asleep, and it's like 3 o'clock where they are in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And he responds right away. I'm like, dude, go to bed because I know you'll be up in 3 hours anyway.
So then you've got to wake up and go in and like irradiate somebody to get a shot of their broken pelvis or something.
Fortunately, I'm not in charge of any of that stuff. I as far as my day job goes, I take care of like repairing all of that stuff, or I should say, I don't do the repairs. I coordinate the repairs. But yeah, I mean that's my day, is making sure that these imaging centers and hospitals are the equipment works. But I need.
So you don't fall asleep and like hit the switch and turn somebody into the Abomination or the Hulk or something because you gave them too much radiation.
Exactly right.
See, you see why I'm a cartoonist? You see why I'm a cartoonist? You see where my brain goes?
Yeah, take
absolutely
Mike
as it should. Your radiation, and that's the first thing you think of.
The Gamma Lounge. Yeah,
that's right. If that's all it took, right? You just a little extra MRI, and you're a 7-foot green guy.
And it's funny because people make that comparison all the time. It's hilarious. It's radiation. People think like, oh, radiation. The Incredible Hulk is like, sure. I'm glad that you're thinking that way because you're combining the two things I do during the day.
Mike, we don't do this a lot on the podcast, but I would ask you, for someone who is looking up to you, like a young Iron Mike, somewhere in the world, like, yo, I want to be down. I want to work for Ubisoft. How would you give advice to them on, like, following a path or following your muse, or what kind of advice would you give to a young person who wants to be you when they grow up?
Well, don't do it the way I did it. Everything that I've accomplished in my life has been by accident. And I know that's not completely true. So real quick, for example, working with Liefeld and getting the Marvel work that I had gotten through him. That was because I knew a guy who knew him, and he was looking for somebody who did digital art. I was just lucky, and I know that's how it happens for a lot of people, but I got lucky there. And then, with Ubisoft, somebody just happened to stumble on my ArtStation page and thing that I did, for a local comic book shop, and that changed my life, and so I've been really lucky. That being said, I wish I had. I don't want to say I wish I had done it differently. Went on the path I went on, but I wouldn't advise somebody to take the path that I had taken. I would advise them to, and this is like I always think about if I were teaching, I would teach my students to take time, figure out what you want to do now. Look at the things that interest you and look at how you can apply them on a professional level. Because again, going back to when I was in art school, I knew I wanted to do comics, maybe interiors, maybe covers, but I didn't realize I was going to have just as much fun doing video games and card games and things like that. It really turned out to be everything that I had worked on, paperback covers. It was all the same. It was like I got to create something that was really cool. But I had this kind of like tunnel vision, narrow mind that I was going to be a comic book artist. So I would say, look at what you do, what you enjoy, look at all the different ways that you could apply that on a professional level. And, and reaching out to those, not just reaching out to the companies, but, doing conventions and getting to meet the people, talk to them, see if it's something that really does kind of fit you as an artist and as a person. And, when I wrote this email to this kid recently, the things I talked about were going to school and not necessarily a 4-year art college to get a bachelor's degree. There's the art in California. There's the Noman School. If you're looking at video games or film, and even if you're not looking at those fields, those are schools that you'll learn so much from. I know the Art Center, for example, it's a rough school to go to. You come out of that, it's like boot camp.
And a lot of people actually don't even finish. A lot of people don't even finish. I think a lot of people stop like their 3rd or 4th year. They don't actually finish, but they get work.
Tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, what you learn from that school, you could apply to anything. I mean, even if you don't end up being an illustrator or concept artist, if you end up applying it to, if you end up being like a graphic designer or something, these are all things that like you're teaching your brain how to see things when it comes to schooling, which is something that I didn't realize when I was younger. It taught me how to look at things through that art. Whereas before I was like, this looks cool, that looks cool, I like it or I don't. Once I started to kind of like break them down as to why I thought they were cool, that's when I was like, oh, I get it now. But yeah, to do what I'm doing now, there's the internet. It's great. I mean, put your stuff out there, do work and draw and do what you love as much as you possibly can. And if you can work on things that inspire you and you're passionate about, that's going to come through in the final product. And if it's just portfolio work, that's the stuff that people are going to gravitate toward when they look at your stuff. And put it up online. There's like ArtStation, different forums, Instagram, Facebook, I mean, those things are, and I know you guys have talked about in the past, things like Instagram and what an audience you have, and Twitter. It's make do what you love and make visible to as many people possible, and don't be afraid to reach out to anybody. Somebody like one of us, or somebody like an editor or an art director at a company that you really respect. Just be hungry. Honestly, I think that's really, I think, so important. That's something that, even though for myself, I've always wanted to do certain things, but I wasn't as hungry as I feel like I could have been. I wasn't pounding the pavement as much as I could have, unless it got to the point where I wasn't getting jobs and it was like a slow period. And, I would get hungry when I needed to be, when there wasn't food on the table. So, but a little bit of just, pick at scraps every once in a while. And that was fine for me, but I don't do that. Be hungry, get out there, just put in the work, and it'll really pay off.
Right.
One thing, Mike, I'll add to your story that I think a lot of people gloss over a lot is because we can look at pretty pictures all day. We could talk about process all day. But one thing that always stands out to me, to people that are successful or make it, is that tenacity, like that dog that you had in you when the guy was like, yo, I need somebody to do this. You know how to do this? And you knew you didn't know how to do this, but you said yes anyway. Right? Those are the moments.
My whole career.
Those are the moments that cut 90% of people out of the business. It's like when it's on the line, you figure it out. And I'm sure somebody who would get that opportunity would go, well, I don't know how to do. Well, can I do it next week?
Or that's not what I want to do.
Yeah,
I don't. If you're not giving me the cover of Batman, I'm not interested. But the other thing is people say luck.
Do that all the time too. It's so frustrating.
Right. Yeah, people say luck, but in my experience at this point now,
it's not luck.
I think it's being prepared. Preparation meeting opportunity. Yeah. If you prepare,
that's right. That's
you put your stuff up. Then when that opportunity comes along, you're able to take advantage of it. Now, if you didn't have that cover of the characters, it wouldn't have been on your art station. That guy wouldn't have seen it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Absolutely.
And that's especially important in the beginning of your career, like you're saying, to get the stuff out there, put it up there, give it away, let people see it. Let people see it. And, now because of Instagram, I mean, everybody used to have a DeviantArt, used to have a blog.
Right.
Those are like moving to the past now. 'Cause I used to have a blog too, right? Yeah. Now everybody's on Instagram or TikTok. In 5 years, it probably will not be either one of those platforms. It'll be something else.
Just be something else.
And you have to keep migrating and going so you get as many people to see your work, so you have the opportunity to take advantage of the opportunity. And if
you mentioned TikTok, for example, there's so many social media platforms that I never see the value in what we do. And then I'll start hearing about it, or my daughter watches TikTok. So I'll see stuff pop up, even if it's on, replaying on YouTube. I'm like, oh my God, I would have never thought there was a way to get your stuff out there. And I didn't realize that something like TikTok would be, a venue for us to really show what we do and utilize it. And still,
well, what's the other one? What's the other one? What's the other one?
Twitch.
Twitch. Now, are you a Twitcher? Are you a Twitcher?
No, and that's Twitch is like Twitch is such a big thing in video games. So now I've actually done some work for professional gamers, which is a funny term. Professional gamers on Twitch. I've done some Ubisoft related work for those guys, but even now I feel like I'm a little bit out of the loop. I still don't completely understand how all these things work. So Instagram is still within my grasp. Facebook, I get, but I'm usually so focused on the actual that I kind of lose sight of these other things that are floating around out there. I don't have my fingers on the pulse as I used to.
Well, you're trying to learn like some other program. So do you weigh spending time twitching or TikToking? Right.
Yeah.
What was the other one? It was before TikTok.
Snapchat.
Snapchat. Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, nobody. I don't hear anybody talking about Snapchat now.
Or Vines.
Right. And
Vine.
I have Vines. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I miss Vines.
Right. But what I'm saying is you constantly have, as an artist, right? You have to keep firing your flair, so people can see your work.
Exactly.
Right. And you then at the same time, you have to keep learning. You have the learning curve of just learning your job and getting better at your job. Yeah. Then there's a certain part of us now that we have to use social media, because if we don't, the company's not going to promote you. If you're not promoting you,
that's right.
They're not going to promote you. Right. And if you weren't promoting yourself, you wouldn't have those jobs now.
Or they
That's right.
want you to promote you. Like,
Right.
I've heard of people who lost out on jobs because their social media reach wasn't big enough.
It's so weird. That's a real thing. You're absolutely right. It's the
Yeah.
strangest thing. They actually
Mhm.
look at your social media and they're like, "Nah, you don't have enough followers." It's like, that's insane. But that's where we're at right now. It's so strange.
Right. So do you block? You have your 9 to 5 job, and then you have your other 5 to 9 job.
Right.
Do you
5 to 9
block?
a.m.
Right. Do you block out time to learn tech, or is it on an as needed basis?
It's a little bit of both. So I rarely get free time anymore. But when I do, it's a balance because I'm spending so much time between the day job and the freelancing that, I don't get to see my family very much. So when I have the free time, I'm like, I should spend it with my family, right? I have a wife and a kid, so
those other strangers in the house, right?
I don't want to walk upstairs and then be like, who the hell are you? So I don't want to freak them out. So I try and use that free time to spend with them, or like house projects and things like that. But it's tough because I want to spend a lot of that time learning the things that I don't know now, whether it be the software that I'm using, try and learn that better, or even like just spending time putting stuff up on social media, and update portfolio on something like ArtStation. Like, those are things I need to do. I want to put out, like, oh, here's some works in progress, or not works in progress, but it's like, here's a step-by-step on how I created this image. I love that stuff. I love getting to see that stuff, and I wouldn't be able to produce it more. But when I actually have the free time, it's usually, spending time with family and getting stuff done around the house. And then it's like right back to work again. So it's tough. So as learning this, these different bits of software, different tools, it really is learning on the job, where even though it'll take me a little bit longer, I at least, if I think one of the best ways to learn how to use something is to have a vehicle to learn it. So, like, for example, if I want to learn with 3D, if I have a character, in order to pose them, you have to have the underneath, just like, if you're working in clay. So that armature, there's so much involved. It's not just like, oh, here's a skeleton inside of a form, and when you move the skeleton, the form moves. Like, there's so many things that you like. The armature has to be able to tell the form where like, if you have the bone in the arm bending, it's not going to know where to bend unless you tell. There's like, it's called weight painting, but there's all these different things involved in making all of these things work the way they're supposed to. And if I don't have a job that requires me to do that, I'm probably not going to learn it. Do you know what I mean? Where I have to have a reason to learn it in order to make the time to learn it. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
Right.
And thank God the jobs I've been working on have, my clients have really and really been happy with the 3D stuff that I'm incorporating into the work. So it's giving me an excuse to learn it more. So
you don't see yourself going in house.
So that's, I mean, what I had mentioned earlier, with the lead artist at Ubisoft in Montreal, basically trying very hard to convince me to move to Montreal, which, by the way, I would love to do. I know Montreal is gorgeous, and being able to work in house honestly, it's a dream. I live on the East Coast, and what our in-house opportunities are very limited over here. So you're either, New York if you're lucky. There's Bethesda in Maryland, and then there's everything on the West Coast and with Ubisoft and up in Canada. So there's not a lot of in-house opportunities around here. I would love to do it, but it's just I have roots here. I have friends. I have family. Just knowing that I can go and get brunch, and Jamar might be sitting right behind me, eating something,
It
by
happens.
surprise. There's Jamar there, like if I moved to California and that opportunity went away, I'd be really sad. So,
Don't stay on my account.
I'm at a point in my life though where I as much as the house thing is tempting, I'm so used to living the life that I'm living with, just
You
being
kind
able
of
to
have the
have
best
all
of
my
both
family
worlds, I
around here.
suppose. Because you
Right,
get to do the
right.
cool stuff, and you don't have to give up your familiarity, I suppose.
Right, exactly. But
Mhm.
I love that in-house feel. I've had the opportunity to visit place in San Diego, and walking through that building and watching all the guys work. It's so cool. You just you're seeing all these guys creating some amazing work. I think when I was walking through there, I think they were working on Death Stranding.
Mm.
Um, but you're looking at the work they're doing, and you have your art directors walking through just kind of like over your shoulder. Oh yeah, why don't you try this, and why don't you tweak this a little bit, and there's a lot of being able to look at other artists work, and just being in that environment is really inspiring. So that's the one thing as a freelancer working in your own little studio that you kind of miss out on. But at the same time, I think we're starting to acclimate to the times now with things like, virtual meetings and stuff like that. Where now, when I'm jumping on a job, whereas before I would kind of have like maybe a quick call, which was real spotty, with people in either California and or somewhere in Canada. Now we're doing Teams meetings, or we're doing Skype meetings and stuff like that. So it's kind of nice. We're not in house anymore, but we're going over things live virtually through the internet. So it's not the same, but it's better than just being alone in your basement, with no
Yeah,
connection.
yeah. Well, I even have one that I do every Monday now with my friend. Was Jamar's part of it? My buddies Scott and John and everything. Where we started one, and then we work through the afternoon. We have the Zoom going while we're working, and we talk to each other,
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
we can show stuff
Yeah.
and everything. Which again was not something. I mean, we used to get together years ago when everybody lived in the same area, but you can do that. You can kind of recreate some of it now because of technology, which.
Yeah. It's really nice that, it's not the same, but it's a nice trade-off. It's nice to kind of, um with a fine, and Jamar knows him, Jero, every once in a while we would just kind of like jump on Skype. We used to share an apartment. We would have our desks back to back, and we would work on whatever we were working on at the time. Like I was working on some Incredible Hulk for Marvel Entertainment, and he was working on some really cool card game art for Wizards of the Coast. And it was so much fun to just kind of like look over your shoulder and kind of shoot the shit. But you're right. Now jump on one of these platforms, and just kind of keep it open, and you're almost working together, but obviously you could be miles and miles away.
All right. Well, Mike, I had a great time. I'm sure the other Mike had a great time talking to you also.
Yes.
I have a thing on social media. Anytime I see something that Mike posts and I get real geeked about it, I just type Iron Mike. And he was like, yeah, I was waiting for that.
Dude,
So,
honestly, I kid you not. If once I get that Iron Mike, it's genuinely, I know I did something right. I'm like, yes,
that's
Jamar said Iron Mike.
my Mr. Miyagi nod.
Yeah.
So,
It
but
never
yeah,
loses its effect.
Yes.
but thanks so much for giving us your evening, man. It was great catching up with you.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
And learn
virtually.
Virtually.
Yeah, and learn about your process. Mike, where can people follow you online?
Well, the nice thing about my name is it's a little bit more rare. So you could, as long as you type my name, whether it be Mike Capprotti or Capprotti, you're gonna find me real quick. So there's Instagram, Facebook. Every once in a while, I'll be able to update stuff on Twitter or ArtStation. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, don't forget his MySpace page is jumping.
Oh my God. By the way, I still get emails like that, like from people finding me on MySpace every once in a while. I'm like, how is that still alive? Don't they just kill those pages after a while?
No, I think they live on
It's forever. Yeah.
they live under the Earth's
The
crust.
Internet Archives.
Yeah. I think what happens with some of that stuff is they probably get reproduced in like Russia or China or something as like farms to probably get email addresses.
Wow.
I wouldn't be surprised.
That's so Matrix.
Yeah, there's another version of you out there in the Matrix.
I've seen them at the mall.
He's
it's
a
scary.
lot cooler than I am.
All right, Mike, we're going to let you go. Thanks so much, brother. And I hope we can have you back on the podcast soon.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, man. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. Have a great night.
Take care, guys.
Take care, bro.
Bye.
See you, Mike. I kicked him out. I dunked on him. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us and having a really cool conversation with Mike Capprotti. Mike is a really great guy, and I love what he's doing in the space. And, like I said to Manly offline, I'm really interested in people who are moving the needle in different ways inside the industry, like doing comic book cover work, doing video game illustration, key art, and things like that, or things that you digest this stuff so much in your daily life, especially with video game art, where you just don't think about who did it, right? It just kind of exists. Like the cover of 2K on your shelf just exists, but there are people that's, art is still necessary in all of these different facets of our lives. So it's cool to talk to someone like Mike Capprotti. Yes?
And how?
And how? All right, let's do some housekeeping. We're going to wrap this up. It was great hanging out with my best bud, Mike. So this Wednesday, the 5th, you believe that, Mike? It's already like the 5th of August. We're going to take off. So the 5th, we're not going to have a live show. I may do some watch party shenanigans. So stay tuned on our YouTube and Facebook channel, and I'll try to put something up. And Mike, what are we doing Saturday? Are we going to have a palate cleanser, the 8th?
I don't know. We have to talk about that after the show. We have to figure out what we're going to do Saturday, next Saturday.
Yeah, we may do something, have a guest on, or maybe we'll chop it up. It's we haven't had a palate cleanser in months. Every episode we've got a new hot guest. So it'll be good to maybe like do a mailbag or something like that. See what you guys are thinking about the show.
mailbag. What's inside the mailbag?
Yeah. But
we need to have one of those old-fashioned tumbler things where you put the letters in. You can roll it around and open it up and pull out a letter from Walla Walla, Washington.
I love it. So I think that'll be it for us for tonight. So thanks, Mike Capprotti, again for coming on. So for Mike Manley, I'm Jamar Nicholas. Thanks for hanging out with us on Pencil to Pencil, and we'll be back soon. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And you know what to do, Mike Manley. Wash those hands. Have a good night, guys.